Hello, and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and we're very glad you're joining us again today. Today we are going to continue with the series that we've begun on Taoist understanding, wisdom, and practices. We've been looking at internal alchemy, we've looked at Qigong. Today we are going to talk about three subjects, at least in brief, that are usually not relegated to the domains of spirituality or religion, but are three of the most vital forces in our lives on planet Earth as human beings. And what are those? I think we all really know. They are sex, they are money and abundance, and they are power. We seem to have such issues, each person, each nation, through all of time, dealing with these three highly controversial, highly charged subjects, that it only makes sense that if we are seeking to create a better, a harmonious world outside of ourselves, inside ourselves, that we really reckon with these three very topical subjects. It seems that they are the very basis of actually most archetypes that we have, that our unconscious reflects upon in our dreams, and the symbols of every single kind of ancient and contemporary piece of art in one way or another, whether it's overt or covert. It shows up in the imagery, in fairy tales, in mythologies across the world. There's always the subject of who has what, who has whom, who is involved with whom, and who has the power reigning over whom. So when we look from a Taoist perspective, we get some enrichment. We get in touch with a sense of wisdom from the source, and it can shed light and illuminate these subjects for ourselves and for the direction of our nations. So we will be relying upon the great master, Lao Tzu, appropriately in a small little book, who the great poet Taoist is credited with actually beginning Taoism. He was said to have been riding an ox or a goat, the stories vary, outside of a town, and the gatekeeper recognized him to be the great immortalist that he was known to be by some who were in the know, and stopped him and said, "I'm not letting you out of this town until you tell me everything you know." Hence, we are told, was the formation of this wonderful book of poetry, the Tao Te Ching. So we are blessed to have it in English, translated by many. The translation I most prefer is that of Stephen Mitchell. And it brings a tremendous ring of truth to us that we'll be reflecting on through this program. So first of all, I would like to, before consulting this directly, let's talk about the most abundant substance in the universe beyond hydrogen or air, and that is sex. We have a vitality about sex that charges through our body literally day, almost for some, constantly throughout the day. There are entire psychologies that have been spun off, i.e. Freud, that says that sex is the basis of all of our energies, and it is underlying all of our human activities. We come back to the fount, you could say, of our own sexual drive and sexuality. And what we then do to lead a civilized life is to sublimate, that is, to direct in other constructive ways that raw, primal sexual force, that energy. So we create great buildings, we produce great art, God willing, we make beautiful music, and we lead our lives day to day and provide for ourselves and our family. Now it's interesting that among all subjects taboo among the great religious traditions of our world, sex is one of those things that is just verboten. You just don't talk about it. If anyone is found in some kind of position in the hierarchy of the Christian or other religions to be cavorting in sexual ways with one's parishioners or what have you, they are ousted. Well, actually, more recently, they've been covered up. But when one finds out a little bit about another person's sex life, and if that person is in any kind of position of power or prominence, everything begins to slowly fall apart. So it's very interesting. The power of sex is so great. There's something just underneath the surface for everybody of great curiosity, of great interest, of great secrecy. So it's shrouded in our larger institutions and kept quiet. Or, on the other hand, thoroughly and completely exploited, let's say, by the commercial media that seeks to use it to sell everything from hair dryers to toothbrushes, or cars, or alcohol. It's the driving force behind sales in virtually every place, just about, that we see on this planet. So psychologists know the power of this, and they are hired by advertising agencies to utilize in the subtlest and sometimes not so subtle ways the power of this maddening driving force. And indeed, what's interesting about Taoism to me, one of the many features of it, is that rather than shunning the power of sexuality and suppressing it or oppressing it or repressing it or denying it, it actually says, sex, beautiful, let it flower. In fact, there are many texts over thousands of years that have been written about the magnificence of the sexual relationship between men and women. And certainly not only, but that is the focus, because we have yin and we have yang. And their interface, their union, their sacred combining is really the subject of Taoist internal alchemy. And whether that is represented by the yin of a female and the yang of a male, or it's internal inside one person, individually, in a sense, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there is always this interplay between yin and yang, between the feminine and the masculine of all of life. And that is the subject of Taoist sexual practices. The marriage of you, if you will, the perfect blending of these forces inside one's own being allows for the perfect marriage and therefore the full holistic awakening and consciousness of a given individual. So rather than shunning, as I said, the power of sex and making it bad and wrong and guilt-ridden and sinful and God knows what, they have taken the glory of its power and the strength of it and said, look, it's obvious to one and all that this is virtually the most powerful power on the planet. Why not use it? Let's use it for our enjoyment, and let's use it for our spiritual awakening, what we call cultivation, the cultivation of qi. So the Taoists, over the years, have developed an entire body of practices, of exercises, of meditations that all are about the exchange of energy based on sexual attraction between primarily opposites, to bring qi up into the bones, into the dantian, which is the center, meaning elixir field, and circulating it through the body, up through the crown and down, tracing what we call the microcosmic orbit. And when two people do this together, you have a magnificent orgasmic experience. And I don't mean just the orgasm that we usually discuss or conceive of when a person has sex, but we're talking about a much broader, larger, more encompassing, how will I say it, spiritual orgasm. Yes, it's bodily, God knows, and yet it is permeating the very tissue, the tendons, you could say, even the cartilage, the bones of a person. When you build the chi, long before even two people touching, and many of the exercises involve a man and a woman sitting cross-legged facing one another, meditating and beginning to circulate energy, chi, around themselves individually first in what is called the microcosmic orbit, which we will go into in a later program, and then begin to form an egg, as it were, a cosmic egg, which includes them both. But meanwhile, they're looking at each other. Meanwhile, they're appreciating one another. Meanwhile, they're allowing the sexual energy to begin flowing between them. And what, of course, happens is arousal, and the enjoyment of that arousal, and the cultivation of that arousal. And before you know it, there can be touch, direct touch. But at first you're playing in the etheric field, you could say, the energy field, outside the body. And it's just so interesting to explore this realm of sexual interplay. In fact, it could be said that touching doesn't even need to take place. Sex could be taking place across a room, through a glance. And of course, it becomes all the richer as we get bodily closer to one another. But the idea is that when there are respectful stages of increased intimacy between the parties, then we have a more sacred union that becomes possible. Anyway, I'm just going to touch upon this in this segment so I can go on to the other two, time allowing, and return to this in a much more thorough way in subsequent programs, and you're welcome to join us then. The point being that just underlying it all, in utter complete contradistinction from any other tradition, save somewhat the Buddhist, that I know, wisdom tradition, religion, in the world, only the Taoists seem to show the appreciation of the domain of sex, sexuality, sensuality, and utilize it for increased spiritual awakening and awareness and building one's what we call chi body. In fact, they have a series of practices. In fact, some of them are outlined very well by Mantak Chia in this book, Cultivating Female Sexual Energy. And there is the counterpart, of course, Cultivating Male Sexual Energy, which help a woman own her body. There is a whole chapter on ovarian power, for instance, and developing a relationship to one's ovaries and to one's womb and to all one's genitals and sexual parts, as well as to expand the whole idea of sex to one's entire body, including, as I've been saying, energy body. So here we see how the Taoist way offers us a total embracing of life. It's not segmented, it's not moralized upon, it's not segregated in one way or another or compartmentalized. It's really brought together the whole of life in all of its magnificent array and splendor. So when we look, we see the next major thing that we all deal with in this life. This is the subject of abundance or prosperity or money, as it translates into our current currency. And it's something that, especially in our urban lives, we all must deal with. And we're always confused and conflicted about what's right and what's not in this regard. How do we manage money? How do we attract money? Is it good or is it evil? Is it something that we should have lots of? Should we have just enough to get by? What is the story? For this, I would like to consult the great Lao Tzu, because he just has so many words of wisdom to share with us that I feel can help to, no pun intended, enrich our understanding. So here are a few words. The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus it is like the Tao. In dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you. Number 9. Fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will blunt. Chase after money and security, heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. The only path to serenity. So, you hear some interesting notions already presented in just a couple of lines from our dear Lao Tzu. And it's not summed up his view of abundance, prosperity, money in those lines, but that gives you some angle. This whole idea of filling to the brim and then it spills. It's this natural, beautiful simplicity of truth. We know that it spills. We know that when the cup is too full, it runneth over. Tao speaks of that. Zen speaks of that. It's just so. And yet, it seems that the values embraced in our society are just those. Fill, 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 fill. More is better. Actually here, less is more. That's the ancient Chinese wisdom. If you want to become whole, let yourself be partial. If you want to become straight, let yourself be crooked. If you want to become full, let yourself be empty. If you want to be reborn, let yourself die. If you want to be given everything, give everything up. The Master, by residing in the Tao, sets an example for all beings. Because he doesn't display himself, people can see his light. Because he has nothing to prove, people can trust his words. Because he doesn't know who he is, people recognize themselves in him. Because he has no goal in mind, everything he does succeeds. Very interesting. Very interesting. It's so unlike the way we were taught. And it's not to say that what we have been taught has no value. It's just to be seen in context. It's almost like you want to take an aerial view. You want to get some altitude on what you've been taught over the years from childhood on, and get some leverage on it, get some altitude on it, and look at it, if you will, from a higher perspective to see if it really obtains any longer in your life, whether it ever obtained, whether it was something that was worth keeping or worth discarding. And what Lao Tzu is suggesting is that each and every one of us knows in our hearts what really is so. The discernment takes place here. Taoism is just the name of a series of practices that many naturalists, shamans, and the like have developed and cultivated over many hundreds and actually thousands of years of practice, living in the woods, protecting themselves, providing food for themselves and for their brothers and their sisters. And they have formed a compendium of understandings, of wisdom teachings, of poems that can help to guide others in this day when we have so lost our mooring. The great Tao flows everywhere. All things are born from it, yet it doesn't create them. It pours itself into its work, yet it makes no claim. It nourishes infinite worlds, yet it doesn't hold on to them. Since it is merged with all things and hidden in their hearts, it can be called humble. Since all things vanish into it, and it alone endures, it can be called great. It isn't aware of its greatness. Thus, it is truly great. Okay, you're getting it. You're getting it. Number 33. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. If you stay in the center and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever. Now, those two little paragraphs talk about, of course, both the idea of power and prosperity, and what is true power and what is not. And the distinction is made, as you heard, between strength and power. In fact, Lao Tzu wrote this book, spoke this poem, in order to help leaders lead. That was the basis of the book. It's about governance. It's about government. First and foremost, it's about self-government. Can I govern myself? Can I know myself? Can I have some mastery over my life, my being, and my essence? Having accomplished some level of that, then I can begin to speak about dealing with others and what you'd call power or leadership among others. It's so interesting right now as we are dealing with very serious internationally rich and tense issues between nation to nation, who should rule who, and who has the authority. Is it an elected body like the United Nations, which is rather humble in general, that is a collection of everyone, or is it the United States that's going to be the policeman of the entire world? These are very troubled times. They need true leadership, and that's something, unfortunately, it looks like we're not getting a lot of, which is why I always say to turn to the words of Lao Tzu at a time like this is so very important. Let's see, what do we have here? Whoever relies on the Tao in governing men doesn't try to force issues or defeat enemies by force of arms. For every force there is a counterforce. Violence, even well-intentioned, always rebounds upon itself. The master does his job and then stops. He understands that the universe is forever out of control. Trying to dominate events goes against the current of the Tao. Because he believes in himself, he doesn't try to convince others. Because he is content with himself, he doesn't need others' approval. Because he accepts himself, the whole world accepts him. You know what? That almost says it all. But I will turn just for a little bit of the next. Weapons are the tools of violence. All decent men detest them. Weapons are the tools of fear. A decent man will avoid them, except in the direst necessity, and, if compelled, will use them only with utmost constraint. Peace is the highest value. If the peace has been shattered, how can he be content? His enemies are not demons, but human beings like himself. He doesn't wish them personal harm, nor does he rejoice in victory. How could he rejoice in victory and delight in the slaughter of men? He enters a battle gravely, with sorrow and with great compassion, as if he were attending a funeral. So that is what we're dealing with when we look at the world, look at the universe from the view of the Tao. Man, heaven, and earth. These combine in a way to be alchemically transformed inside of us, using the power of love, the power of sex, the power of the human heart, in conjunction with the richness of nature, the bounty of nature, to take what it is we need, not to go over the brim, and when it comes to matters of governance, to first learn to govern ourselves, to tame our own minds, and then with love in our heart, humility in our soul, to then offer to be of some leadership to others. Anyway, I hope this has been somewhat helpful to you to understand the larger picture of the Tao and the way it embraces these otherwise seemingly controversial subjects of sex and sexuality, and power. And we'll see, and we do see, that from a Taoist point of view, they all truly blend into a harmonious and organic whole. And that is the way our lives can be. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World, and I'll be continuing all of these subjects in subsequent programs. So please join us next week and in further programs, so you can enjoy the riches of what we have to offer. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.